Good afternoon, welcome. Firstly, apologies for my mufti, my casual attire. When I was approached by George and his friends at the Farm Writers Association, I got quite excited because George is in a book club with my wife. And whenever they disappear to review high-level literature, I get hugely jealous, one. And secondly, I pine for an all-man kind of bromance equivalent. So I thought today might be an option. But looking at the guest list, it looks like they've liberalised entry to the lunch. I don't know how many farmers there are actually in the room, and let alone farmers, how many of them actually write. But it's a pleasure to be here. We really like to engage with a lot of audiences in the broader agri-space in Australia and New Zealand. I think it's hugely important. I think there's a lot of runway going forward. Can recognise a couple of friendly faces in the room. People have been very good to me in my recent arrival in Australia. Gus Harris from Harris Farms is one. James from Sanger, another one. I spent a lot of time with guys like Gus and James, probably thinking about the same questions that you are when you look at the Asian opportunity with your businesses. So I hope today we can demystify some of those questions for you. I'm going to race through these slides because I think it's more valuable to get to a Q&A and talk about some of your own industry initiatives and challenges and opportunities. I will caveat it by saying that while I don't have a pair of R&M Williams boots, which is hugely disappointing to my wife's friends, not necessarily to my wife, she's quite cosmopolitan for an Australian, I have spent a lot of time trying to understand rural Australia and the challenges there, because I've seen this incredible journey from New Zealand, whereby having an FTA a few years ahead of Australia gave them a bit of a leg up. But as Helen Clark said at the FTA signing in 2008, which I was in attendance at, you know, government really opens the door and it's for industry to step through that door. So I don't think you can really, you know, look to government to solve all your issues in China. I think they've got very strong relationships up there, and we have an MOU with Austrade and work very closely with them and state governments, and I recognise some government audience in the room today, and it's wonderful to have them here. But it's really up to industry to work out how do they work together for this journey, because in New Zealand the legacy of the cooperatives have been hugely important. And not having cooperatives in areas like honey, for example, have meant that, you know, there are probably opportunities which they haven't managed to harness. For example, Chinese consumers are very concerned about the UMF measurement for what is the unique Manuka factor inside honey. And in New Zealand, the two largest honey producers actually have different measurements. So we get endless questions on all of our websites and their flagship stores about, is this $80 jar of honey as good as this $80 or $120 jar of honey? And so I think it's really important that industry address these issues kind of proactively, as opposed for waiting for overseas government to do so. And you know, the infant formula industry in New Zealand has effectively been driven in terms of regulation by the Chinese, because they didn't want to keep waiting for regulators in New Zealand to sort out which processing plants and brands were run by less qualified people and which ones were run by really well qualified people. Similarly, there have been concerns in Australia recently about ESL milk. You know, ESL milk does not have a technical specification in China. It sits between fresh milk and UHT milk. And so, you know, small things like this can be hugely upsetting to industries, and I know a lot of you are aware of the recent issues with some of the abattoirs. I stand back and see these as very small road bumps in a much larger opportunity, which is going to define the future for this country and also for New Zealand. As I mentioned, we will move through this material quickly. A lot of this is available on our investor relations site and on our blog. I'll make sure that's shared with the farm writers here and the non-farm writers. I recently had the benefit of going out to Armatory for Anzac Day weekend with some family friends, and wound up at a place called Marimba Station. Some of you probably know that. This is part of the Paraway Pastoral portfolio. And as full disclosure, I nearly started to work with that organisation when I came down to Australia and New Zealand. And so I think it was interesting to see how that farm has evolved into a kind of 10 product business, and how they're trying to buffet themselves through the seasons and through the different challenges they have with geography and different products. More importantly, what they're trying to do is exactly what every large Chinese investor is trying to do. And these large investors, when they look at this market, and I've been close to the journeys of the same groups that are investing in Australia are investing in New Zealand. And they're looking at this with a 100-year view. And that's the way Jack Ma looks at Alibaba. He looks at a little bit more than 100 years, but I'll tell you his parameters shortly. I think the point is, you need to, as an industry, do that. One, if you want to be around in 10 years, and really be able to take advantage of this opportunity. And this station used to be run by Swire Group. I'm an old mate of Sam Swire's. He lived up in China for a long time, running their Dragon Air partnership with Air China, which was quite challenging for someone with his surname in Beijing. They have a long memory there of history. And as you walk into Marimba Station, up on the wall, they've got the old Swire farm manager, Jackaroo, Jillaroo thing, kind of like the head prefects list at high school, which I know a lot of you hark back to as strongly as I do. And it went down and it finished 10 years ago, and someone else took over. And I said to Sam, I was out at this incredible station, beautiful property. He's like, oh yeah, how's it going out there? Yeah, don't think we've ever made much money out there, but I'd be interested to see how they're doing. And that just kind of made me stop and think. Okay, we're really good at farming, and Bill English, the New Zealand Prime Minister, said exactly the same thing at a big Maori iwi conference in the Hawke's Bay recently, but we're not very good at branding. And that's where Alibaba kind of comes into the story. We are all about taking brands into the China market. All sorts of platforms to do that. There are lots of people here today. There's some guys in the room from Almakur, which wants to do the same thing with the Daigo market here. There are a lot of people in Australia and New Zealand who can help you do this. So I just want to talk about this whole potential, but have you think in the back of your mind of the lens of how can you brand what you have? Because if you don't have a brand, you will continue to trade commodity products into the sunset. And a lot of people can be great commodity traders and work in arbitrage and other areas, but we really believe the future of Australia and New Zealand is this brand. And there's another reason why this is so important. And that's because there are 1.5 million Chinese in Australia and New Zealand. My mother's a refugee to New Zealand in the late 60s when the New Zealand cultural makeup had been changed, as has Australia many times over, and to the richness of the cultures of both countries. This population of Chinese here is something my colleagues in Europe and North America would pine for, because through their smartphones and social media, this population is going to tell China how good your stuff is. And if you talk to Blackmores or Swiss or anyone else out there, they will all tell you their fortunes have really been made by the vision and the activity of a lot of their early Chinese representatives and buyers and sellers. And so out of, let's say, a 30 million population in Australia and New Zealand, that's an enormous ratio of ambassadors we have here to help you do that. And we have a big e-commerce expo in Melbourne, our first one on the 13th and 14th of October, and a lot of these merchandisers are going to be there helping brands put a toe into the water and try out the China market. Back to Jack's vision, Alibaba's a very young company. Young with history, which is challenging when you go to meet, big heritage brands that have been part of the Australian-New Zealand narrative and fabric for hundreds of years. We're very respectful of that. And also young in terms of its demographic. The average age of our employees is 27. And that's a pretty young age for a 53,000 person company. The business was founded in an apartment 19 years ago in Hangzhou, and there's a really wonderful link to Australia in that I'll mention later. The Australian-New Zealand business is run by Maggie Joe, who's a very dear colleague. Maggie kind of has founder status at Alibaba. She was employee number 48. We also have another sub 100 employee number who has been with the business 18 years, a guy, Scott Nee. And we also have some wonderful Hong Kong colleagues and I've also recruited a BD team here domestically. We also sit with our Ali Cloud and Ali Pay team members. So we've got about 30 people in Australia presently. This slide is the money slide for today, and I apologise at how crowded it is. As an e-commerce company, 18 months ago we didn't really have an international team formally recognised, so our friends in Hangzhou, our engineering colleagues, had slides that were far more detailed than this, and all in Chinese, which would have been useful for about 6 people in the room. We've refined this, and I'm going to run through it carefully, and I'm going to make analogies to Western platforms. I only do that because it'll help you understand what each bucket means on the PowerPoint. The first caveat that China is a parallel universe for internet. Forget Facebook, forget Twitter, forget Amazon, forget eBay. None of those companies operate in China. And that's mainly because most of them went there, usually with a fair bit of confidence, and got pretty squarely burnt, and then left with their tail between their legs. And so when we look at this ecosystem, some amazing things have happened. And I'm not saying China's internet is better than Silicon Valley or the broadband vision for Australia. So this is again, these solutions are catering to them, particularly in food. People really want to go and try it somewhere first, maybe in a restaurant environment, and that's where Hema Fresh comes in. Again, using the information and the data is really, really important. A lot of companies talk about big data without having the data, and that's where if you have a Tmall flagship store or you work with these partners, you can get access to this data. Also, the granularity of data from Alipay is astounding. On Alipay, for example, we have a function called Zhima Credit, Sesame Credit. Maggie, who I work with, I think she has about 150,000 renminbi of credit, so $30,000 worth of credit she can use any time with no charge. That is part of her 10-year buying history with Alipay. The default rates for fraud at Alipay are at the 2 to 5 basis point level. For credit cards, it's 2 to 3%. The credit score guys at Alipay have no problem with Maggie cruising around with 30,000 Australian dollars to spend whenever she wants, because we have that history of her credit. Also really tough for Chinese consumers when they travel internationally. When they go to a hotel or they get a rental car, if they don't have a credit card, which many of them don't, they have to put down whopping big deposits. And that's where a lot of what we're doing is making it really be about convenience for the shopper, so when they go overseas, they buy, they don't waste time registering credit cards or other financial products or other services. And again, this is what they're used to in China, so we want to bring that experience to other markets. Singles Day, our big shopping festival. This is a 9-year-old phenomena. It's a very, very, very big equivalent of Digital Friday and Black Friday. There are about 7 or 8 other big shopping festivals during the year, which the Chinese government are driving as a way to drive consumption, get people out shopping on the big celestial Chinese holidays, much like in other parts of Asia, or Australia with, Secretary's Day, or the one I love is Halloween. That seems to, we'd imagine we all sit in America right now if you responded to Halloween promotions in Australia. These are not unusual things for retailers. Now they've just moved into the online environment. And now, until Singles Day, very difficult to get a meeting in Hangzhou or any of the e-commerce hubs because everyone's in lockdown for Singles Day. Also, if you haven't pre-performed at 618, which is the mid-year festival, the category managers in Hangzhou probably aren't even going to give you eyeballs for Singles Day. So now you need to jump through a lot of hoops to be really relevant on Singles Day. That's how big these events are getting. A lot of it's around virtual reality and then shopping with virtual reality goggles and all sorts of games. This little Tmall cat, Catch the Cat, with this shopping bag. This is a Macy's promotion for the brand Betsy Johnson. Some of the women in the room will know this fashion label. This promotion was all about using your phone to catch cats either on a screen of an iPad or a desktop, or using your hand to catch little cats, these little icons that are falling down a screen during a shopping promotion, answering questions, interacting with the site, and then getting credits or discounts from this icon to go shopping. The only equivalent I can think of in Australia and New Zealand is the Pokemon phenomena. Anyone play Pokemon here? Be honest. Oh, Gussie, sensational. And you know, the only thing Gus is going to do is crash his car playing Pokemon or drive off a bridge or, you know, walk into someone on Oxford Street. The brands have not managed to monetize the kind of emoticons, right? This is where China's at this very different place. And it's really cool. It's different, it's quirky, it's weird. You know, get into it. We also have big investments the way that the big internet giants or the unicorns do in autonomous cars and virtual reality, etc. If you take nothing else away from today, apart from the fact we're not Amazon, you know, Jack's vision is really about taking brands from 4 places in the world, you know, where the good stuff is. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, Europe and North America. I can't name too many South American brands beyond a few football teams and, you know, some good Angus beef and maybe a few wine labels. They're not... Brands do not predominate around the world in the way that they do in those 4 geographies I mentioned. That's the stuff the Chinese people want. That's the stuff you want. Okay, so we want to take that to China, down to Southeast Asia with Lazada, and then to the Indian consumer with an investment we have in a business called Paytm. Again, we're not really targeting the Western audiences per se. Amazon's doing a great job of that. You know, there's a lot of the rest of the world to carve up for everyone. Some of the brands that we help in China. Jack was very proud to open our office here in Melbourne. Anyone heard of the Morley family in the room? Some people, hopefully. You know, Jack's first pen pal in China was an Australian guy from Newcastle. Jack would hang around all the Western hotel lobbies in China in the late 80s or early 80s and try to practice his English. And he befriended this wonderful family from Australia. He came out to Australia and, you know, learned to drive a car out here, learned to go fishing here. You know, really got to appreciate this country and see that there's more to the world than just China, and also understand that it's a much broader world out there than what he was led to believe China was all about. He recently bequeathed an endowment to the University of Newcastle in honour of the Morley family. He also noted it took him 7 times to get a visa to come here, which is strange for China's wealthiest man. They seem to let a few more of them in these days. At that point in time, there actually wasn't a tourist visa for people who were not in an organised travel party. So he was kind of in a strange group in terms of entering Australia. But he is hugely fond of the market. What he did say at the opening this year is, you know, how surprised even he was at the number of Chinese people in Australia. And again, I look at our business and just see that as a huge asset. Some of the brands that have flagships on the platform, there are about 1,300 brands across the whole ecosystem. About 100 of them have flagships. A lot of them will sit in an umbrella store. I'll tell you what that is in a second. And a lot of them would be represented on Taobao or in other people's stores. I'm far more excited about, I guess, how do Chinese people live a New Zealand lifestyle and live through those brands with, you know, wearing some Kathmandu clothing or knowing what farm or what part of Australia their beef comes from, or having been to a cellar door for some wine and building a relationship with them as opposed to just having Grange and Yellowtail and not much in the middle. And this is really what you need to be able to do and tell as your brand story. And the farm to plate thing here is huge for all of you, as you know, with your Australian consumers. There will be big opportunities still in milk powder and honey and Ugg boots and all of the hero products that we've seen. But we really approach a lot of interesting brands and concepts in mother and baby, and organics, organic skincare. Apparel's actually an interesting one, and food has got obviously, you know, a lot of runway left. Vitamins, minerals, supplements, yes, our biggest sector still, very important to us. We just had some great new strategic announcements last week with Blackmores, Sanofi, Swiss, and one more, Chemist Warehouse, and that'll always be a big space. But, you know, we have to think beyond that, and those brands are actually thinking beyond that. So how do you get in there as a small SME? I mentioned the platforms at the top. I mentioned the ones at the bottom. Bit of colour about the ones on the left. Umbrella stores are people who bring all these brands together. Jessica's suitcase is a fascinating one. This is run by Jessica Rudd, the former Prime Minister's daughter. She lived in Beijing. She married a wonderful Chinese guy, Albert, an old Macquarie banker. She's got a great story to tell mothers and babies about her journey in China. She's one of the few white Daigou shoppers that I know who takes stuff back to China for her Chinese friends in her mother's group. It's papaya ointment, it's some little lunchbox for her kids that's got better plastic in it than others. It's all this type of stuff. So she's built a huge following around that. And that's really important for brands that maybe want to partner with her to look at something in, kids' toothpaste or some new area. Australia Post have a store, and Chemist Warehouse are obviously the juggernaut, hugely successful. But do not think that, Chemist Warehouse has been a cakewalk for them. They take this very seriously. They've got a dedicated team that do it, and they work on it with, huge diligence. And they're amongst the best flagship operators we've seen in the world. On the right, some of our more obscure businesses. Tmall Direct Import is a new business called Tmall Select. It's been rebranded since I put these slides together to tell you how fast things are moving. It's effectively like an editor's selection of product. So when consumers go in there, they can be excited about what's sitting in there and not really have to make a decision. It'll only have a limited number of hero products on it from each brand. If you want to get more stuff, then you go to the flagship, and you can also find it on Taobao Global, which is the bonded warehouse version of the C2C site. So our greater import strategy really has brands talking to all three groups. The goal is to have a flagship. You can dip your toe in the water with direct import. You can also dip your toe in the water with Taobao Global. And that'll all be explained in far more detail with workshops, etc. at our October e-commerce conference in Melbourne, or Expo. And we do this probably every second week with clients in Australia for workshops. Some fun stuff we've done in food recently. This Queen Apple launch from New Zealand, we spent about a month telling people that we're going to launch a new Apple. And everyone thought we were going to launch a new iPhone. But actually, when the promotion came out, it was an Apple. Everyone was like, oh, what a great promotion. We thought they were going to launch a new phone, but actually, hey, let's buy a whole lot of Apples anyway. Again, we couldn't really tell how that was going to go until we tried it. Suffice to say that, Rocket Apples and all sorts of cool brands out of New Zealand, the Apple space, are doing really well, as is the horticulture space in Australia. I don't know if you've seen the latest Rocket Apples, but they're sold in a tennis ball package, 3 very small apples. It's like 50 renminbi, 50 Rambos as I call it, $10 for 3 apples. It seems like a good bit of branding to me. Brolos Lobster, this is the Geraldton Cooperative in Western Australia. Again, a big Taobao trader has just connected with these guys. They did a live auction where we had lobsters with GoPro cameras on their heads. It was a bit of a kind of, my lobster's bigger than your type thing. Great for guys, but people who, understand lobsters, the biggest lobsters are never the tastiest lobsters. So that might have backfired. They might have got the initial face from that purchase. But again, Chinese people out on the boats, signing their names on the local newspaper, kind of proof of life. This is today, we're here, this is real, all being live streamed. And so that may seem strange and pedestrian to you, but that's where they're at on the journey, because I don't think too many Chinese guys have gone out on Geraldton fishing boats before. There might be a few guys a bit further out trying to catch some of their lobsters, but that's not the brands that we want to work with. Calypso Mangoes, this is with wonderful guys at Fresh Select, or Perfection Fresh rather, and the Smorgon family. Again, this type of Calypso Mango had never been traded in China. The guys at Perfection Fresh are really confident it's got better colour and taste characteristics than the R2D2, which is the genus that has been sold into Hong Kong for 10 years for Chinese New Year for a long time. Again, they had a vision to do this. It wasn't a cakewalk the first time. There were issues with fumigation, getting to fumigation machines. The season was late, but we'd actually sold a lot of them pre-sale, so that reduced some of the risk for the farmers and for the buyers as well. Obviously, a lot of work with Austrade. It's great hosting a lot of these people in Hangzhou. This is an interesting one, a blockchain partnership with Blackmores and Ozpost in Australia, with Fonterra and New Zealand Post in New Zealand. PwC is kind of driving this with us. This is really about having a showcase to show how blockchain works in the food supply chain. A lot of people are talking about it. We really want to have a showcase that we can then open up to all partners. And you need to find some people with some deep pockets to do that with in the first instance. And these groups, they all trade very valuable product already in China with big volume. And so there's going to be some great coverage of that coming shortly. A-Pass, again, another cool kind of a cohort of our users here. A-Pass is a collection of 100,000 wealthiest consumers out of 580 million. The top 100,000 account for 4% of revenue. These people spend on average $45,000 US a year online, which is not a lot when you think about what we all spend generally, because in China you just buy a lot more stuff online. It's far more convenient to do so. Of the group we had in Australia, 6 of them spent over $80,000 US a year, all female. We also brought down some KOLs. We parceled out days to brands and had wonderful, wonderful experiences, really intimate experiences for, really interested yet still novice consumers. We screened their data to get people who already buy Australian product but who hadn't been to Australia. We did a day on bridge climb. Alipay is a bridge climb customer. We were the first people to live stream a climb on bridge climb. And we convinced them it's so important that you need to do this. We had these people all with these iPhones strapped to themselves and hiking up, and it was a really fun day. We also went up to Macca's Beef up in Port Stephens and in Newcastle. That family, 4th generation Angus beef family, they're doing stuff in China, like Providoras, like Argyle, like Ruby Rose, Sanger. There's a lot of people who are up there doing this, but if you don't get up there and pull your sleeves up, it's really difficult to understand what the market's like, and you can't expect to have a quick win up there. We had 4.5 million page views just from the Melbourne Fashion event, and actually overall, I think on an average level per day, it was over 5 million viewers for the KOLs. The great thing about this versus maybe the WeChat platform is that these events were live streamed during the day, and that coincided with a shopping event where you could buy Macca's Beef, or you could get a rebate on bridge climb, buy some cosmetics from the brands, I forget who we were with. And then 2 weeks later, for people who missed out, it was screened again. But during those screenings, actually you had to be the first million people to sign up. It wasn't open slather for everyone. It was a really demand-driven promotion, and that's kind of what the future's about, far more personalised shopping events for everyone. So that's a bit about the platform. I just want to jump to a food platform quickly, just to really leave you with a bit of inspiration about our newest platform. This is Hema Fresh. Some of you will have heard about it. It doesn't have a website, so you can't actually see it. But it's effectively something like a Harris Farms or a Thomas Ducks, but there's a delivery component and a dine-in component. It's really about being in this club of users, whereby you live in this ecosystem, this app, and it's all about what they call Ultimate Fresh. Started basically 2 years ago. It wasn't made public to Alibaba's team until we weren't publicly able to talk about it until about 6 months ago. It's a wonderful team who are at one of the other big platforms. They're founders, and it is personally incubated and 100% owned by Alibaba. This is the locations currently, very high-end, big high-end shopping malls. The goal is really, these tier 1 cities. When you get into the store, people can run around with you, or you pack your own bags that are color-coded. They then travel along the ceiling in these coat hangers and get sent to delivery bikes, which we operate out the back of the store in polystyrene temperature-controlled boxes that have different levels of temperature for them if they're veggies or frozen or fresh. And so there's products from all over the world. Treasury Wine have their own stand of wine in there. A lot of seafood and Aussie beef in there already. They've sourced the world's best rice from Thailand for a private label Hema Fresh beef product. A2 Milk, fresh milk's in there. If you are in Shanghai or Beijing, please do hump one out. I really believe it's kind of the future of retail. There are also signature kind of ranges and signature deals and clubs related to same day, next day delivery. If you buy something in the store, it's 30-minute delivery within a 3-kilometre radius. That's all they feel they can confidently do. They develop relationships directly with the brand, kind of cutting out the distributors. Again, great for telling the story. Also doing private label. A lot of seafood. A lot of their benefits are pretty explainable. Humar is a play on the word for a hippo. Again, not too sure why that was the brand, but it's cute and quirky, and that's what this consumer likes. They've also got a big catering business, because why? Weddings and business events, they want imported food, right? Again, some of the profiles of the demographic, again, women drive most of the stuff in China, not unusual, are getting increasingly younger and younger. The biggest cohort's under 30, and they're spending, I can't tell you what their ARPU is, but it's a pretty chunky number for a supermarket right now. So it's effectively what we call this new retail. I'll leave it there. That's a lot to digest. Really appreciate the chance to be here, and happy to take some questions.